got you there with Sean DeLaney. Got you there.
I'm Sean DeLaney, and today on What Got You There, I talk with Snowflake CEO Frank Slootman, who is one of the most inspiring, driven, and impressive executives you will ever come across. On this episode, we're going to talk about his Amp It Up framework, leading for hypergrowth, raise expectations, increase urgency, and elevate the intensity. So if you want to unleash the power of your organization, your people, and yourself, you are going to love this conversation with Frank Slootman.
We got you there with Sean DeLaney. Got you there. Got you there with Sean DeLaney.
Frank, welcome back to What Got You There. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Good to be back with you, Sean.
Yeah, it's great to see you originally on episode 223. And we talked about so much about your past before. We're going to get a lot into your Amp It Up mindset and how you've run some of the most successful companies there are to date. But I would love to know, is there just a mindset of yours that if you could pass on to anyone starting out their career, you would love to give them?
Yeah, and by the way, a mindset is what it is. I mean, it's not a philosophy or a methodology. It is a state of mind. That's exactly what it is. And the state of mind is something that it's always on, right? So every encounter, every message, every meeting, it's like a filter, a way you sort of perceive reality as it folds in front of you. But, big advice that I give to people that are starting out their careers, or even people that are sort of within the first 10 years of their career, it's like, look, don't worry about the job, don't worry about the title, don't worry about the pay, don't worry about the location. You want to join a really good company. And the point is, I use this analogy of elevators, right? Some elevators go up, some go down, some don't move. And there's nothing you can do about it. Once you stepped in the elevator, you've surrendered yourself to the fortunes or lack thereof, of the elevator that you stepped into. So that job is not that important because jobs come and go. But that elevator, has a long lasting impact. That choice is incredibly important. And often people have that priority reverse, where they're focused on titles and pay and location and all these kinds of things, whereas that's really not that important. When I look at a resume, I look at, what choices did this person make, over a period of time. And it says a lot, when you see a sketchy, random walk, resume, it just makes you question, somebody's judgment, and what their temperament really is, about how they do things. So that's why I say, the elevators are the critical choice. You step into a good elevator, man, you're going to look like $1 million no matter what your individual merit might be.
Well, I mean, you're speaking from experience, though. You mentioned those hard choices, right? Like you've actively taken on jobs that other people would have passed on because they were too difficult. The scenarios were too tough to take on. And so is that just something like this mindset you've always had ingrained in you?
Well, I've been in a lot of shitty businesses. Okay. So I have learned the hard way how hard it is, to take something that is just inherently not good. I've taken on businesses that were already past the end of their productive life cycle. What do you do then? Right. I mean, you cannot just sort of, reboot a company and reinvent, all these kinds of things. I mean, now you're at a level of, fundamental reinvention, everything, where the risk is insanely high. And, I had a conversation with the CEO of a very large software company, and he always looks at me with a puzzling, look on his face, and he goes, like, I can't figure you out. Do you just know how to pick him, or are you a really good CEO? I say, you know what? I need to be both, okay? Because if I am a really good CEO and I don't know how to pick him, I still end up, with a mediocre outcome, okay? So that is the answer to that question. It's like being a card player. You need a good hand of cards, not just being a good card player,
Yeah, it's funny thinking about like you being this almost enigma. So I was like, what is behind Frank today, right? Like you've accomplished more than anyone could dream of in multiple lifetimes. And then I came across this line in your new book, and today I'm less driven by career ambition than by a hunger for sport, action, excitement, teamwork, and a never-ending pursuit of self-improvement. I would love for you to just speak about that line, like that drive, a never-ending pursuit of self-improvement. How do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I don't want you to take that, in too noble or idealist type of manner. It's just, it's a personal source of satisfaction when you become the best version of yourself. And, becoming the best version of yourself, you have to subject yourself to very trying circumstances, like an athlete. Do you think you just become great by just showing up? No, you're gonna have to confront the gravest, circumstances. That is what's going to, steel sharpens steel, right? I mean, that's how you become, really, really strong. And I actually, know more about this now because I was actually off for 2 years between 17 and 19. And I noticed that, I suffered a level of atrophy because I was no longer, in the heat of the fire, on the firing line where your senses are just incredibly elevated, and your reflexes are incredibly honed. You start losing that, when you are no longer subjected, to all these signals that you're getting when you're in a role like this. So that's what it is. It's just like a quarterback who you can't get them off the field because they're so damned addicted to, the last 2 seconds throwing a long ball in the end zone. I know it's football season right now, so it's a good analogy, right? I mean, how many times do you see these guys retire and they come back because they can't help themselves? They crave the action. Think about Brady. I mean, why in the hell is he still on the field? Well, because he would miss it. He would would.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's this never-ending thirst for excellence.
Yeah.
And
he'll regret the day that he can't do it anymore.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering for you, I mean, you're so far in your career right now. For you, when you think about that self-improvement, is it just being in the arena, or are there things outside of being in the arena? Let's just call it like studying or trying to learn from other leaders that you do, or is it more just like, nope, I'm jumping in the deep end and I'm going to learn to swim by experience?
Yeah, I actually, attributed the book to the man in the arena. It's the 1910 speech by Theodore Roosevelt. I've known about that speech for a very long time, and it really, really inspires me because there's a lot of people who have opinions on things, that have commentaries on things, and people that really don't build anything but kind of live off what other people are building. So it was always incredibly important to me. I wanted to be the man in the arena. I didn't want to be the man that had an opinion about the man in the arena, right? And so that's really another aspect to this. Is like, look, I don't want to be, a consultant. I don't want to be an investor. Of course, we're all investors. We like to invest in companies and all of that. But fundamentally, those are passive roles. I wanted to have the active role.
Yeah, you even talk about that. Like plenty of investors, right? Like they've got this pattern matching experience, but so many times, like they've never actually run a business. And so you've got to be careful of who you're listening to and those sources that are advising you in terms of how you should lead your company.
That's why the first book that we wrote, Tape Sucks, it's not 12 years ago. And people just understood that the content in that book came from what I call a fellow traveler. In other words, somebody who lived it over and over for years and years and years. So people, they read it very differently when it comes from a fellow traveler than, some academic or some, objective bystander who has an analysis about how the world works. So there's a level of credibility and authenticity that you just can't get from anybody else other than a fellow traveler, somebody that has lived your exact life, the anxiety, the trials and tribulations, the terror, all of it,
I'm wondering for you as this major public company CEO, what goes on behind the scenes for you that most people just aren't aware of? Like what's consuming your energy, your thinking? Because there's so many things that you have to have a pulse on to run a company like Snowflake.
Yeah, well, don't make yourself crazy, okay? Because if you want to run a company and you're running around as a chicken with your head cut off, you're not going to last long, okay? So the first order of business is to, A, get organized, and B, develop an incredible, strong team. And when I say team, it's not just the people that directly report to me. The team just permeates, throughout the entire company, every country, every market, and so on. Because, if I'm needed, every second of the day, we had a real problem. I actually run the company in such a way I can be gone for 6 months and we would never miss a beat. That's how I operate. That is my mindset. That also affords me then a level of luxury that I have people that are much better than I am, at doing what they do. And that's the way it should be. Hell, if I'm the best at everything, we have a real problem, So, but then, I can also think much more, strategically, much more abstract, much more high level, rather than, I'm buried so deep into the details that, I have no perspective left. Now, that said, I traverse during the day from the highest level to the lowest levels. I'm involved in individual transactions, individual customers. We have dinner tonight with a big bank CEO. So I do go, the whole spectrum from the most granular to the least granular. And I like that. That is one of the great things about a job. I mean, everything is my business and nothing is my business. So, I can be anywhere. I show up in any country, in any meeting. That's what's so great about it is, you can be like a free safety. You're all over the field, tackling the guy who comes for the secondary, so.
I love it. You pull on analogies from so many different domains. It's clear you've got such a great understanding. I'm really intrigued, though. You mentioned just being that lateral, abstract thinker CEO, which is much different than a functional executive. And I'm wondering for you, were you always like that, or did you almost have to cross this threshold of confidence in yourself to be that abstract lateral thinker CEO, or is that just something that from day one, that's how you were, that's how you operated?
Yeah, that is the way I was from day one. And quite honestly, I wasn't that good as a functional operative. I wouldn't have been a good engineer. I wouldn't have been a good finance guy, even though I'm dangerous in these fields because, I was well educated and all those kinds of things, but I'm not a functional tunnel vision type of a person. I'm again, another football analogy, I have peripheral vision. I look all over the field, up, down, sideways. On every vector. So that is my natural inclination. That's just the way I am. Yeah.
I'm wondering with that, are there things you'd recommend to other lateral thinking CEOs in terms of how they can be better just from that high level mindset perspective?
Yeah, if you don't have it, you got to force yourself, into that mode of thinking and just expose yourself to content and people, that are that way. And, so you need to seek it out. The problem is often that people sort of gravitate towards, where they're good, where they're comfortable, as opposed to where they need to be. And I often, people ask me, what kind of a CEO are you? They want to stick a label on me. And the reality is, I'm the CEO that the situation requires me to be. I always say that to my people. And by the way, that changes over time in the journey as well. I become what I need to be at this juncture, at this company, at this moment in time. So, forget labels. There is no label because it will change, and I just morph into, what the situation dictates. Again, I use the word situational a lot because so much of what we do is situational,
It was funny. I had a high level executive in the data space actually reach out to me. He knew you were coming back on and he had a question kind of about like the future handling that. And I basically was just like, you understand, like Frank is so adaptable and flexible. It's like, no matter what is going to come next, he's basically built the foundation and framework that he can move and evolve and adapt to that, as opposed to those new situations that come at you. Most people just try to tackle the situation. It's like you get to the first principle of like, what do you need to handle any situation that comes your way? I just think that's such a crucial point, and the one that I really love. I just love like these foundational skill sets, mindsets that you've had over time. And I love this story in your book, actually talking about your dad, one of the days when you were a janitor. Do you know what story I'm talking about that really shaped your relentless drive for just betterment? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, no, I still remember that story. That's why I wrote about it in the book, because that level of frustration at a young age is very formative, right?
Yeah, can you just? I would love for you to tell the story and then how that.
No, I mean, I was 16 years old, cleaning toilets in a very large factory. There were like 1,000 people, working there, and I would cycle through every toilet between 9 to 5. And I had a supervisor, a really ornery guy. He would at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, he'd go, look at this bathroom over here. And, I go like, yeah, I hit that at 9 o'clock this morning. What do you think happens during the day? But I'm 16 years old, right? And I'm just almost incredulous that the guy would criticize me on that. So I get home that night and I say to my dad, that guy's a real idiot. I certainly had a way with words even back then in my own language, but I was like, yeah, those are the people you'll be working for if you don't get better grades, and I'm like, God, that's a scary vision, that those are the kinds of people I will be working for, when I'm, all grown up and out of the house. That's a nightmarish scenario. And quite honestly, I talk about this in the book as well. My career didn't really take off until I got my first CEO job. And I talk about the reasons why that is. And that's because my natural reflexes and instincts were exactly what people wanted from me. So it was a match for my natural disposition and temperament. Whereas all the years that went before, people always felt they needed to negate my natural instincts and reflexes because I exerted too much ownership and I was too far out front. And, peers didn't like it because, I might have overstepped the bound here, there, or everywhere. And I talk about the lack of empowerment for driver type personalities. It's a huge problem. So when we hire drivers, I mean, my big thing is I'm going to unleash them. Okay, I'm going to let them run wild, not to the level of dysfunction. I always say, you need wild ducks, but wild ducks also need to be able to fly information, right? That's another way of thinking about it. But you really have to empower strong people. That by the way, that is what motivates them. You want to turn them loose rather than sort of put a tight box around them where they can only do so much. No, you want to fully maximize their potential, not limit it.
We're definitely going to get into maximizing people's potential, which is part of your Amp It Up framework, which is obviously the title of your new book, which I think is exceptional. I really want to know about the evolution of this Amp It Up framework. So we're talking about football. I know you're a huge admirer like myself of Pete Carroll and the Seattle Seahawks. The thing I found really interesting about Pete Carroll is he actually really didn't start winning, and this is when he went to USC, until he developed his coaching philosophy, similar to your Amp It Up framework. And he actually got that because of John Wooden. And John Wooden didn't win a championship until he really sat down, contextualized his thinking. So I'd love to know how the evolution of your Amp It Up framework took place.
It's a very good question. And because I always have a word of caution for people that say, look, I want to just follow you around for a week and see what you do. And I always tell people, don't try to be me. Do not try to be me. You need to become you. Whatever the best version of you is, that is what you need to strive for. And by the way, struggle is the most formative aspect of that. That is how you become who you are meant to become. So that's why I always say embrace struggle, because it's there for a reason. You need struggle because that's how you become the person that you need to become. And if you avoid being close to the drivetrain, if you avoid being where the shit hits the fan, then you're not developing, you're not learning, you're not becoming the person that you're supposed to be. So it's you learn over time. And in my particular case, I learned fairly early on that if you are insanely focused and driven and relentless about pursuing what you do, that everything will give way in the process. Once you figure that out, that you cannot be stopped, by sheer effort, determination, resourcing, focus, then you start applying it to everything. And all of a sudden, everything gives way. Over time, everything gives way. And these are personal sort of discoveries that all of a sudden become your MO, because you're like, hell, I'm approaching everything that way because that works. You do what works. You stop doing what doesn't work,
Yeah. You mentioned you have to go through those challenging times. One of the funny things is there's all these people that like ourselves, right? We're obsessed with growth and developing. And then these hard times come and we kind of shy away from them. And it's like, why the hell are you spending all this time working and developing these skills? It's like an athlete. It's like there's 30 seconds left. Brady wants the ball every time because he spent his life developing these skills. Same thing in the business arena. It's like when you got a really challenging time, unleash the skills you worked on. And that's just something you've embodied. And so we talk about the Amp It Up process. I would love to dive specifically into these. So the 5 steps in the Amp It Up process: raise your standards, align your people, sharpen your focus, pick up the pace, transform your strategy. I would love to start with raising your standards. And I know you admire Steve Jobs, and he had that line, it's either insanely great or total shit. And I would just love to know, for you as the leader, the CEO, what do you do instantaneously upon entering a new scenario where you just raise those standards, just like an overall step function improvement?
Well, I mean, whenever, whatever the conversation is at hand, right? First of all, I'm trying to determine, do I like this? Do I not like this? But then I want to know, what the group thinks, or the person who is, presenting something. What do you think? How excited are you? Why? Because it's always like, all of a sudden, sometimes you find yourself in a conversation where everybody's kind of lukewarm to an idea. I'm like, as long as we're lukewarm, we're not going to do anything. Okay. Until we are bursting, with excitement because we're going to conquer the world or some other insanely great, vision of the world. We want to do things that get us out of bed in the morning. We want to do things that are insanely great, right? Because if not, we're just dragging ourselves through the day, checking boxes, trying to get things off our desk, being passable, which is the worst words in the English language, right? So I always have the standard of excitement, enthusiasm. This is cool, right? As opposed to it's good enough or it's okay. Those, in other words, that passable standard is very, very common in organizations. People are just kind of trying to do things that make them not fail, that make them not get fired, as opposed to, no, I want to reach for something special here. And by the way, that is cultural, and that can be taught, and it can be learned, and it can become an attitude and a mindset that everybody can embrace, because it's much more fun, it's much more energizing. It's just how you want to be when you get through the day, where it's just you're just engaged, you're fully in the zone, as opposed to I'm just trying to get the hell out of here because I'm tired and I need a drink or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, you're not going to get into that like absolute zone flow state if you're just, like you said, operating in lukewarm water until it hits 212 degrees Fahrenheit. That water's not going to boil. And I guess I'm wondering, do you just see the majority of companies and leaders, like their standards are just way too low? Like they don't set inspiring enough visions for their people. Is that one of the key things here then?
Yeah, they're trying to be respectable. They're trying to be safe. They're trying to, not to get fired. I mean, one of the things I talk about in this book is this whole notion of incrementalism, which is sort of one of the worst things in the world, where people they basically take the current situation as a given, and we're going to sort of inch our way forward, from that status quo. It's exhausting, right? Because what if we didn't have the status quo? What if there was nothing? Because there's people out there who think that way because they don't have anything, right? They're trying to invent the future. By the way, that's what Snowflake did. They had nothing. They reimagined and redesigned, the future of data operations and data management. Those people are incredibly dangerous, as now has been well proven, right? So why wouldn't we think that way? Forget what we already know, what we already do. We had a clean sheet of paper. What would we do? And now you get all the juices flowing, and you get the engagement. Oh, I would do this, and then you can start working back to the present from the future state that you just envisioned for yourself. That leads to very, very different outcomes, very different approaches, and that's really what you want. Incrementalism is like, let's be 2% better than we were last year. I mean, it's just exhausting to even talk about it,
Yeah. You mentioned about like being able to see that future state. That's something you do extremely well. And you've said to me in the past, you said there's a huge gulf between the embryonic stage to where things are to where they can become. And you seem to just be able to see those things in the future. Is there anything you've done over time just to see the potential, both in the companies you've been involved with, but then also the people? I mean, you do a hell of a job accelerating people on their career growth.
The reality is that this is people's natural state. They just have, unlearned it somewhere along the way. And so what you do is you sort of want to change their perspective and say, look, forget what you know. Let's go rethink. And once people get, pick up that scent, I mean, you can't shut them down anymore because they have that crazed look in their eyes where they want to do something really insanely great. And now they're on a different plane, and if you don't enable it or empower it, then they're going to go somewhere else because you can't put them back in the box, and especially people that come from big companies, they sort of want to replicate their MO from the prior company because that's their comfort zone, that's their comfort level. And by the way, however inappropriate that may be for the current conditions. I mean, I remember hiring people out of SAP many years ago, and we were a very small company, and then they wanted to implement, SAP style programs. I'm like, you're not thinking. We're not SAP. We're not even. We can't even hold a candle to SAP. Why on God's earth would you, act as if you were at SAP when you're at a company? In other words, again, everything is situational, right? I mean, there's an appropriate way of doing things for companies in a certain situation, certain state of development, rather than I'm just going to mindlessly replicate what I did in my last job.
I'm wondering how you've done such a good job in entering the scenarios, and even let's call it when you came into Snowflake as the CEO, and you've gotten everyone to shift. And maybe I'm wrong there, but you got everyone rowing in the exact same direction, which I just see as just such an incredibly impressive and monumental task. Like, is there something that you do differently, right? Because I don't know, I feel like this is one of those things where it seems so hard to teach, and it's got to be an embodiment. But I'm wondering if, like, you coming in with a very few number of fellow employees who've been with you in the past, how do you get that tidal wave shift in the entire company?
Well, the most important thing is, contrary to popular belief, I'm not a command and control guy. I'm not somebody that hands the tablets down the mountains. And I tell people, you do what I tell you or else. That is absolutely not the way I operate. I'm a full-blown team collaborator, facilitator. So I bring people together. I mean, we are highly lateral and networked as opposed to following an org chart. I mean, org chart almost doesn't exist in our company, and that is really important because people really operate through influence, not through rank and title. We have this saying, we always go direct. In other words, when you want to do something, you find the person in whatever part of the organization where they live, and you just go directly to them. It doesn't matter, whether you outrank them, underrank them, whether you're a peer, none of that matters. Okay. All those organizational, constructs are there for a reason, but they don't matter. We are one giant team, and we work in a fully networked manner. And people will engage with you to the extent that you have influence, that they think you are, authoritative and impactful. And that's really what you want. You want people to have influence who are impactful. You don't want people to have influence, who just have a title. That's the worst of all worlds, right? So you need to test yourself. But an organization that is designed that way, they just look at you, not what it says on your business card, even if you have one. They listen to what you're saying, and if that makes sense, you're going to agree, and you're going to go like, yeah, well, let's do this, right? That's a natural, way of how organizations, function, because you're helping us, collective us, be better. That's a value. We're going to embrace you, So that's really how it works. But a lot of people that come into the company, they're not used to that. They've never learned that behavior, and they're reticent. They'd rather, send an email to their manager, hoping their manager might, I call it upper delegation, by the way. I say, there's no such thing, okay? Delegation is down, not up, But it's like they're nervous. They're like, yeah, I'd rather, write an email to my manager and saddle him or her with the issue than I'm going straight forward, right? So you need to teach that behavior. And every couple of months, I talk about going direct because there's so many new people, they've never heard it. So I have to repeat myself. Guys, gals, this is how we do it here. We go direct. And if you can't make the case, in other words, if people don't think what you're saying makes sense, then you're losing the argument. Hell, I lose the argument often enough. And I don't mind. If I need to lose the argument, I better be losing the argument. Suppose I'm winning a lousy argument. That's the worst of all scenarios, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think a lot of the people who've seen what you've done, they would have assumed complete command and control, right? But no, you almost take that Laozi approach, empower those others underneath you, right? Like the water's going to flow to them, and then they feel like they've completely done it themselves, and then they've been able to watch and replicate. And I think a lot of this gets built on trust. I know you put so much into trust. I'm wondering what you do well just to develop trust as soon as possible with the other people in your organization.
Yeah, trust is the universal currency, right? It's what makes the world go around or not if it's missing. Things get very easy when there is trust, and they get incredibly hard, when there isn't. And it's an underrated thing, currency, quality, whatever you want to call it. So you don't get trust. You don't get the benefit of the doubt. Okay, you don't. When I come into organizations, people are incredibly wary of me, and then they don't trust me. They discount, what I'm saying. But over time, when you are true to the word and the things happen exactly as you said they would, the trust builds more and more and more and more to the point where they're going blind on what you're saying. They accept it and assume it's correct without even thinking about it, because you have earned the trust, right? But you have to be very careful about it. I remember in one of the first all hands meetings at Snowflake, I try to explain to people that through, solid execution, focus, et cetera, this company could be worth tenfold of what it was, at the time. I said at least tenfold. And, I was only 8 weeks in or whatever it was. And, there were so many people who were like, yeah, whatever, 10X, and I said within 12 to 18 months, I gave a time frame for it. So not only did we didn't just do, 10X, we did like 30X, in that period of time. And I remember on the day of the IPO, I got emails from people saying, we didn't believe you that day. I said, but not only did you do it, you said you did it like several times over. So what do you think that does to trust? All of a sudden, what you say has a whole different meaning, than what it did before when they were like, yeah, whatever, So
yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things to be able to 30X those expectations there, obviously part of the framework as well, is sharpen the focus. And I was recently spending some time with the winningest Olympic winner medalist, short track speed skating, Apollo Ono. And he was saying every single day, I got so focused and intentional in what I was trying to do that day. And I'm just wondering for you, like when you're talking to other executives, what can they do to narrow the focus, right? Like you're looking at 3 shiny objects. How do you narrow it down to just one? What do you do extremely well to be able to do that?
Yeah. Well, that's really hard, and that's the whole point of it.
Yeah, right.
So, a laser can cut through steel. Why? Because of focus, right? Whereas, if you diffuse the light, it does nothing, right? The very simple concept: if you're a mile wide and an inch deep, you're gonna be swimming, in molasses, right? Swimming in glue. Is the most awful sensation when you're just not making headway, and that happens because we're spread too thin. It's human nature, by the way, to keep adding things. I always try to take things off people's plate, or I try to sequence it. Okay, in other words, okay, let's do this first and this last. I'm not taking it off your plate, but I'm changing the order, right? And the question I always ask, I say, look, let's do an exercise here. If you could do only one thing for the rest of this year, let's say it's mid-year. If you could only do one thing, what would it be and why? Talk me through the what and the why, right? Because most people never ask that question. It's really important because then you know how to mass your resources behind one thing. Well, the impact's going to be far greater than when you're massing the resources behind 5 things or 10 things. I've been in numerous meetings with other CEOs and board meetings, and they put their priorities up, and there's like 15 of them. I'm like, you have none when you have 15, okay? So you got to really bring that back to, what is the one thing, not because you only will be doing one thing, but if it starts to clarify, what is really, really important here. And, if you get that wrong, then basically you're wasting and diluting and misdirecting the resources of the enterprise. That's what you're doing. Okay. And your job is to do exactly not that. You have to focus the resources the right way. Then you can move mountains.
What I love about that question is just the power, right? Like you want better answers in life, you got to ask better questions. That's like one of those really extremely potent questions. You were talking about though, that one thing you're going to focus on. I think of that as strategy, and please correct me here if I'm wrong in any of this. And one of the things that you talk about is you want to focus first on execution as opposed to strategy. I would just love for you to talk about that because so much light gets shined on strategy, but you're kind of approaching this differently, thinking execution first. I'd love for you to just describe this.
Yeah, years ago, Andy Grove, an Intel great, he said no strategy is better than its execution, which pretty much summed up what that means. In other words, your strategy is not worth a goddamn if you can't execute it. Okay. Yeah. So he had, by the way, that man had incredible ways of saying things, sort of the John Madden effect, right? He had this incredible way of saying simple or complex things in very, very simple ways. But you can go far, with a mediocre strategy, but very, very strong execution. And the reason is, if you're a good executor, you will also gradually become a better strategist because you can now distinguish between whether the sources of problems are strategic or execution operational, right? That's pretty damn important because what happens a lot in Silicon Valley is we always want to tweak the strategy. We don't give execution another thought, but we want to tweak the strategy at a drop of a hat. Because execution is just, something you do day to day and, whatever, but strategy, that is the high-minded parlor game that we all want to play. Oh, this company's doing that. Oh, that company's doing that. Right. And people lose their nerve. They start tweaking and changing their strategy, at the drop of a hat. That's how you lose. One of the things that we did really well at Data Domain is we had a strategy and we never wavered from it over a 7-year period. I mean, we just relentlessly executed that strategy over and over and over. And, in the end, we had 15x, the exit outcome than the next nearest player. We had a better outcome than all other players combined, right? So we focused on being insanely good executors and we trusted their strategy, right? That's exactly the opposite of what happens in most companies. They don't trust their strategy. And they're constantly tweaking at it, and then the execution is obviously flailing as well. I have numerous examples in the book as well about things we did differently that we trusted, because we were not mindlessly doing what people had done before. We were original thinkers, we were first principle thinkers, and that just served us incredibly well. But you need to learn to trust your strategy until you're such a good executor that you can really discern between strategy problems and execution problems. And I'll give you a very simple example. This is very, very common in Silicon Valley. Every time they have a sales problem, what do? They fire the VP of sales and go to hire another one because, the analysis has to be that there's a sales problem. Well, what if it's a product problem? Because most sales problems are product problems. That is just an absolute fact. There's a lack of product market fit, but they don't want to entertain that possibility. Why? Don't call my baby ugly, But, intellectual honesty is the first victim here, being able to see things as they really are versus the way you'd like them to be. And of course, founders don't like fingering the product because hell, they just convinced investors to put millions of dollars in. So how am I going to tell them that the product is not that good, right? So let's go hire another VP of sales. That's really going to solve the problem, So.
Yeah, you can see how all the parts of these frameworks really work together, which is just so essential, so important. One of the things I'm always intrigued about, because you just go so fast, right? Like that you push. How do you balance between growing too fast as opposed to like not growing fast enough? I know this is like a nuanced, fine question. There's a lot of variables there. I'm just wondering how you think that through.
Yeah, well, if I think back about everything I did and didn't do, I've never overdone it, but I have underdone it many times. So basically the problem is, I dare you to lean in harder, and because most people just don't lean in far enough. If you're really overdoing it, you'll know it, okay? Because there's signals and signs and everything that will indicate it. I mean, there are times where you're not ready to scale. I talk about these different stages, of development: embryonic, formative, and scale. If you're in a formative stage, you're not ready to scale, right? So you can blow a ton of resources, at that stage, and they will not translate to yield. They will not, because you're too formative. You're not ready for scale. So depending on what stage you're in, yeah, you can overdo it. And that's typically what happens. I'm going to hire 10 salespeople when I don't even know how to make one successful. That's incredibly stupid, okay? So that you're in the formative stage. You're not ready, to open the floodgates, right? But once you are ready to open the floodgates, then people hold back. In other words, they have the exact opposite reflex. When they have to open the floodgate, they don't do it. They don't pivot, right? And you have to pivot hard, in all these different stages, right? Once you got the recipe and the formula down and you have a repeatable system, holy cow, you pour on the resources like there's no tomorrow, right? But the opposite is also true, right? When you can't convert to yield, that's the whole point of crossing the chasm, is you have to get to the other side, before you can really pour on the resources. So it's not mindless. There is not sort of a one size fits all. I just hire up a sales force and we'll be rich. No, it's a hell of a lot more complicated than that. So, it's a bigger conversation is what I'm saying. It's very logical and common sense, once you sort of, try it on for size. But, again, there's VCs around the table. They're in a hurry, let's pour on the resources. I mean, even when I joined Snowflake, the board was telling the management team, staff to $1 billion. I'm like, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Staff to $1 billion? You can organize for $1 billion, but staffing to $1 billion, you're just going to slam bodies, and by the way, and they were, because they took it literally. Right. Jeez. So you cannot take these simplistic, mindless, ways of doing things. I'm just going to, and by the way, we were blowing, huge amounts of money. We were 200 million negative, when I joined, and it was unbelievable. And you look at the P&L, it takes you 10 seconds to figure out this is a slob-fed pig, way too many resources, zero discipline, So.
Man, Frank, every time we talk, I literally just get so amped up. It's clear why so many employees get so inspired by this. I know you've got George Washington there over your shoulder. Last time in our last conversation, you mentioned him as an inspiration. Yeah. Who else for you? I know you mentioned Roosevelt as well. Is there anyone else that you've looked to over and over again as someone who's just like, man, that's the embodiment of someone who's searching for excellence within themselves?
Yeah, I know. We look at people. I also look at enduring institutions. For example, I'm a big fan of Amazon, right? And they're a big partner of ours as well, huge partner. But it was clear as day, what Amazon was trying to do from day one. People just didn't understand it, didn't believe it, whatever the hell it was. But their ability to commit themselves to a strategy for 20, 25 years was just unbelievable. And by the way, they have these concepts. They don't talk about it that much, but I just observe it from what they do. Their whole game, because they're in businesses that are incredibly commoditized, hugely commoditized, right? So, where's the value add in commoditized businesses? Well, they take the friction, out of everything, and they understand how important the notion of friction is in the world of business. If you can take friction away, you can go very, very far. And they're very, very subtle things. One click and it shows up 2 days later consistently, right? Who does that? Nobody did that ever, right? The same thing. I mean, you could buy virtual machine minutes, with a credit card. Take the friction away, right? I don't have to go get a purchase order and ask my manager, hey, I'm going to stop now because I'm already exhausted just thinking about it, right? So and by the way, I talk about friction all the time. That is, I have my filter out for friction in everything. And these are things I learned from observing what Amazon has done over the years. There's other companies that also, have done well. I'm a huge admirer of Apple. I've already said that. Because, reinventing the world of music and all these things, it's all about the friction is gone. I can just, streaming music, what an insane invention. I'm so old, I can remember where we had cassette tapes, we were copying, content from the radio, right? I mean, you just can't even imagine how great things are, compared to how they once were. You just can't, but they did.
Talking about removing the friction there, Frank. You guys listening to this can just click or obviously go down to the transcript for Frank's new book, Amp It Up, Leading for Hypergrowth by Raising Expectations, Increasing Urgency, and Elevating Intensity. Frank, I really did enjoy this. You are so precise with your words. It's just like 100% signal, no noise in that book, which I think is great. Obviously, everything will be linked up. Anything you want the listeners to know about the book? I know we dove into a lot of these big principles. There's so much more in the book. Just want to make sure I open it up to you.
The important thing is that, the book are not lessons, it's not wisdom, they're just our observations about, our world and how we did things. I'm trying to answer the question that people ask us over and over again. What did you guys do? Because you have achieved extraordinary successes with different businesses at different, time periods and different business models and different competitors, different technologies, right? I hate to lecture the world on this is what you should do. I'm not saying that. You need to become the best version of you, right? And there are certain timeless, principles and observations and ways of thinking about situations, but it's not a prescription. You cannot just read the book and okay, throw the book away, I got it, check, we're done. It's much harder than that, unfortunately. But, once how to approach, situations, you're on your way to become a much better version than you would have been otherwise. And that's really what we want for for this whole process to be.
No better place to end there. Frank, I can't thank you enough for joining us on What Got You There.
You bet. Good to see you.
What got you there with DeLaney? Got you there.
And I want to thank you for watching another powerful episode of the What Got You There podcast. We drop new episodes every single Sunday. So if you subscribe to the page, you'll be the first one to see these powerful episodes. Remember, we deconstruct world-class performers to understand their strategy, tactics, and the routines they've used to help them become world-class in what they do. So if you want to understand and then implement these into your own life, you're going to want to subscribe to the page. Remember, we also put out a weekly newsletter called Momentum Monday, which is just a quick synthesis of everything I've been reading, listening to, and watching behind the scenes. You can stay up to date and follow everything we're doing at whatgotyouthere.com.
What got you there with DeLaney? Got you there.